and welcome to How I Got on Broadway. I'm your host, Uchenna Agbu, and today we are joined by the wonderful actor, John McGinty. How are you today, John?
I'm fantastic. Really, thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited for our conversation.
Of course. Thank you for being
And it's
here.
a beautiful day outside, I just want to say.
It is. Good luck for us.
Exactly.
All right, so let's just jump right into it. I was doing some research, and I actually learned that you didn't really grow up expecting to be an actor. You went to undergrad for finance, and then you ended up getting your master's in something more related to the field. But I'm really curious to hear about what that moment was for you, and when did you make that decision to pursue acting, and why?
That's a great question. So, first of all, I want to say growing up, when I went to the theater, it wasn't something that was a big thing for me just because I didn't have access to that world, whether that was through interpreters or captions, it wasn't there. And so it wasn't part of a norm in my life growing up. But I remember one time I went to the West End in London, and my grandmother, this is my dad's mom, I think maybe when she was younger with me, went to see Phantom of the Opera. And again, there were no interpreters, there were no captions, and I didn't really know what the show was. I could see the audience reactions, I could see what was happening on stage, but I had no idea what I was really getting into. But once the music started and you can see the set come to life, I realized, oh my God, what is this feeling of entering a new world? And as the story came to life, it hit me that the story is really simple, but it made me feel like I wanted to be a part of it somehow, whether that was backstage working on something, painting the set, costumes, whatever it is. That was the moment where I realized I wanted to be a part of this. And I kept that in the back of my mind. I stored it away, so to say. And then I went on my journey, like you said. I decided to go to college to study finance because I didn't know if I could be a full-time actor, especially as a deaf actor. And I felt like it was impossible. And I didn't really have deaf actors to look up to because I wasn't exposed to that kind of history and culture of deaf theater growing up. So then I studied finance in college, but I had that experience in the back of my mind, and it was calling to me. It was pulling me towards it. And I realized I had to take a look at it and explore what that art form meant to me. And it just so happened that Deaf West, which is a theater group, decided to have a musical called Pippin. And the rest is history. So really, that's where I found that love. That's where I got into it. And really, it was thanks to my grandmother who exposed me to the arts.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So like you said, you didn't have a lot of deaf actors really to look up to as you were on that journey and making that decision. So what did representation look like to you as you were going through your process of feeling like you could be seen? And what were some moments where maybe you felt seen on stage, even if it wasn't necessarily through an actor who was deaf?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because when I was growing up, I had a bilingual background. So when I was first born, I was hearing actually. And so that meant that my first language was spoken language. I didn't lose my hearing until I was 1, and I learned signing later. So for me, the representation that I saw was slim to none. So yes, for example, seeing Marlee Matlin, who won the Oscars, seeing a deaf actor win something was representation. But this wasn't on the stage. This wasn't theater. This wasn't Broadway for me. But now I'm seeing the landscape shifting. We saw Troy Kotsur won Best Actor. We see more deaf actors on stage. And that's what's really important because as a community, we can come together and work together compared to historically. I didn't really feel like there was something to be a part of. But with that exposure, with that understanding of how to be a part of the community, which I have now, I wouldn't have been here today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you found something to be a part of. And in 2018, you made your Broadway debut in Children of a Lesser God, which is a show that specifically features deaf characters. What was that experience like for you overall?
So it was surreal. And a lot of people would probably assume that as a deaf actor, you're playing a deaf character. That must be so easy for you to play. The truth is that's not the case, because the character that was involved in that production actually required me to use my voice. And speaking is not my natural language now. And that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Because off stage, I always would kind of stand in the wing and say to myself, John, you have to make sure you're pronouncing all the letters clear enough, loud enough. And I would do that before I got on stage. It wasn't like, I'm in the wings, I'm relaxing, I'm having fun, this is normal for me. And then I go on stage and use my voice. So to have to use my voice was a terrifying experience. But if I didn't have that kind of challenge, I realized that I wouldn't be here as far as being able to embrace all the experiences I've had. So something I've learned about being an actor is that it just is so important to be authentic to yourself. And that means I would rather choose a role that is completely in sign as opposed to doing any kind of voice related acting, because in sign, that's more natural. That's who I am. And I can get on stage and I don't have to worry about other things. As you know, like as an actor, when you're on stage, you bring that authenticity there rather than thinking in the moment. But that's what I was doing in Children of a Lesser God. I realized I was thinking in the moment as opposed to bringing what is an organic approach for me. And really thankfully for Kenny Leon, who directed Children of a Lesser God, he brought this challenge for me to be able to push my fear aside, keeping in mind that production was something that we didn't use mics for. Oh. So this theater was at Studio 54, and this is a huge space. And everything that I delivered had to be from my diaphragm. I had no training, no technique, no breathing practices prior to that. So everything really came from my throat before that. And I had to figure out how to then deliver my lines from my diaphragm. And that took me months and months and months to really get, because as a deaf actor, I don't have that kind of training. We don't get that kind of training at all.
Wow. So what did your process look like from the beginning of the process to when you ended up closing the show? How much did you feel like you had trained yourself? What differences did you notice within yourself?
So I will say that the lesson I learned at the end of the production is that I had to stop caring. I think I was worrying too much prior to that. And looking back at young John, I realized life is just too short. And we as humans are going to make mistakes. And I would rather make a mistake and grow from there as opposed to making everything right and perfect. So when we opened, I was really struggling to find my own inner connection, especially with my speech delivered lines. And again, speaking in my second language for me was very terrifying. And it took me a while until I became more comfortable that I realized, you know what? If the audience can't understand me, too bad for them, because this is who I am. And that's the character. And the character doesn't have to be somebody who has perfect speech. And I wish I had that lesson in me sooner. And the best part of it is that now I use that lesson and I can bring that to any future production, any future character. I'm able now to tell myself on the first day of rehearsals to be messy. Who cares what people think? Because they might like you, they might not like you, but that's not on you. But you're in the room for a reason. And that's what Kenny actually said every time we were in rehearsal. He said, you're in this room for a reason. And I didn't really get that line until I did Our Town with him.
Beautiful. All right. What are some other things that surprised you once you entered the commercial theater space?
That is a great question. So I'm a resilient person. And growing up, life was not easy. It wasn't easy to where I am now. It took a lot of roadblocks to get here. And it takes a lot of courage to face those and also to get in the door, especially in commercial theater, because to be honest with you, this commercial space is a very much heavily audio-centric world, which is not my world. And so how do I get in? I have to stomp, I have to knock that door down, and really to keep on doing that. And it really just takes one person to make a difference. And then from there, you're able to make connections to other people. So like, for example, when I did Hunchback, the musical, I was the first deaf actor to do it. But now there are over 10 deaf actors who are able to do this production as well. So we just need more people in the room to really push that boundary forward and to push what are norms and typicals out of the way so that other people have opportunities too.
Absolutely. And that's another question I had. You were the first deaf Quasimodo in Hunchback, and that came after, I believe, advocating for yourself in the audition room. Can you talk a little about what that moment looked like for you?
Absolutely. So I remember doing a small workshop prior to the audition for that show, and the director's name was Glenn Castle. Beth might be saying that wrong. And the irony of all of that is that Glenn used to direct regional productions of the original Broadway production of Children of a Lesser God back in the 1980s. So my point is that he already had familiarity with how to work with deaf actors. And so he had that know-how. And I didn't know who he was. I didn't know his history, where he had worked. But I did a little research, and I realized that he had worked for the Sacramento Musical Center as the creative director. And I saw the summer season lineup, and I saw that they were planning on doing a regional production of Hunchback. And I thought, you know what? Why not? So I emailed Glenn, and I said, Glenn, hear me out. So I pitched the idea, and I pitched it of having Quasimodo be a signing deaf Hunchback, and then could have a voice actor do the singing, and that's how I proposed it. Glenn hesitated, and quite frankly, I could understand that there might be a fear around what people's reactions would be to this choice or what people would think of this choice, but he said, let's try it. So I came in, I auditioned. And I think I did the audition song from Mamma Mia, and it was one of the worst decisions I have ever made. Quite frankly, right? Sometimes you just pick a really bad song and you just have to make it work. And so then I got to the callback, and the rest is history. It was one of the most beautiful, profound, stressful experiences for me because it was the summer stock. So that means we only worked for 1 week. Condensed all of that work, and then the following week it was showtime. Wow. And it was fun because it was not on a broad stage, but it was a round stage, and so it was really freeing with the audience. And I'm just so grateful to Glenn for giving me that opportunity, because if it wasn't for that, I would not be here. Yeah.
Beautiful. I think that I find that sometimes watching, because I've been with my research, watching deaf actors perform in musicals can sometimes even be more powerful and more profound than how people usually view it. And we have to take a moment to get into your performance of Listen from Dreamgirls with Jordan Fisher at Broadway Backwards last year. Very simply put, it is one of the most moving performances I have seen in my life. And I just want to know, how did the crafting of that scene come about? Tell me all about it, please.
So as a gay actor, I think it's really important for me to be a part of organizations that support LGBTQIA communities, which is why I've always wanted to be a part of Broadway Cares and to promote the fight for AIDS. So I actually contacted the organization owner and reached out and said that I'm familiar with the practice of bringing in Broadway actors and that I would love to be a part of it however I can. But I also wanted to give an opportunity for the community to be a part of this as well, for the deaf and hard of hearing community who identify as gay or LGBTQIA. And so I had a meeting with them. This was over the summer. And I was just throwing out different ideas. We all were. And you know how that specific production tends to do maybe like a gender swap, or how they pick songs is from a traditional stance and then flip it. And the owners decided to throw out the idea of Listen, and I don't think I could have found a more perfect song. And then being able to work with Jordan Fisher and Adele Marcon, Beth is probably saying that wrong, but this group of people was just, I don't know, it was beautiful. And I was just so grateful. We were only able to have 3 rehearsal days to get together, to teach sign, to work on the translation. And once it was at the New Amsterdam Theater, we only rehearsed it once in the space, and that was it. And then the actual performance is what you saw. And I remember when the curtains came up, I was laying on the bed, and I was sweating profusely. But I thought about my grandmother in that moment. And I thought about that day when we saw Phantom of the Opera in London. And that feeling of being a part of something just gave me a sense of calm. And everything just melted away and disappeared. And then I really didn't care about the audience. Again, what I mentioned before, like if they like you, great. If they don't, that's not on you. And I had the best time of my life. It was a ball. And everything about that song really did relate to my upbringing as far as the experiences I had around depression. Because there were a lot of people who shut the door on me for being deaf, and it made me feel worthless. And so now the tables being turned feels like, well, now it's our time. I mean, I try to think about the younger generations, and they are really the voice of tomorrow. So we need more stories told that allow the younger generation to be exposed to the arts. And I hope that in the next 5 years, we see young, new, deaf and hard of hearing talent on Broadway. We need more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that even it goes outside of people who are deaf and hard of hearing. Even me watching that performance, I watched it with my mom at like midnight when it dropped, and we were just sobbing in tears. Like, this is just one of the most beautiful things. And this was before I knew I was working on Our Town. So I remember walking in on that first day and being like, guys, John McGinty is here. Like, I'm so excited. That's how much it moved me, just being able to see that. So I think that's really beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you. I'd love to talk more about the relationship you have with music and musical or music-driven theater as an actor, because you're very connected to it.
You know, that's an interesting question, because a lot of people will think about music as far as famous songs that people know or cultural pop songs, but that's not how I see music. I pick songs that have strong beats to them. That's what I respond to. And sometimes the beat is really bad. I don't know that. And some people are like, wait, what song are you listening to? And I'm like, I don't know, it feels good. And sometimes even when I'm driving and I'll put on the music, the radio, and I can feel the bass in the steering wheel, passengers in the car are going to be like, John, you know, that's actually just like talk radio. That is not a song. It is a recording of a TV show or something. And I'm like, you know what? I don't really care what they're talking about. It feels good. And so for me, music is a body connection to something that feels good in my body. That's what I seek. It feels empowering. And I remember I had gone out of the country. I don't remember where I was specifically, and it was during Christmas, and my mom decided to buy me just stacks of different random CDs, all Broadway songs. So whether it was Mamma Mia, Camelot, just all of the old classics. I remember going into a random bathroom and just locking the door, sitting on the floor in this foreign country, putting the headphones on, listening to the music. I did this like all day. And that's when I first introduced myself to the exploration of what music means to me. And then that's when I kind of tapped into music. and wanted to understand more about it. And so the next step for me was lyrics, right? So the first step is like, if you give me a song, if I don't feel it, you might be moved. I'm not going to respond because I can't feel it. So I don't have a connection to it. But that's the hard part for me to then continue to step forward, because then I have to look at the lyrics. And from there, I can realize that the words do have meaning beyond just the feel of the music itself. And then from there, I start playing around with sign language and the lyrics. How can I translate the lyrics? Because sometimes when you read the lyrics in English, it could mean something to you in your head as you sing it. But for me, in sign language, it can mean so many different things, because we have parameters of sign, meaning we can play around with it. And we can play around with how the words reflect themselves. So actually going back to the word listen, for example, with the song from Dreamgirls. So I ask you, the word listen from Dreamgirls, what does that song, or what does that word in that song mean to you? Listen.
I think for me, it's more about like looking at the word listen rather than the word hear, because she's asking for understanding. That's how I see it.
Exactly. And that's what I want people to understand. So as a deaf gay actor, I want to be understood. I'm a human just like you. And we're all no different. We're all full of intersectionality. We're all living in the same world. And so I hope people see this and think to themselves, okay, John is John. John is not a deaf person. And that's it.
Yeah. And I think it's also just looking at how and understanding how people experience things differently, which people tend to not do. They don't put in enough work to know.
Right.
I want to take a moment to talk about the concept of deaf gain as opposed to hearing loss. I'd actually never heard of this phrase until I heard you talking about it in an interview. And I was like, oh, I did some reading on it. And it makes total sense to me. I feel like I have a good understanding of it now. But I would love if you could talk a bit about what it means to you and how it's been apparent in your career as an actor.
Well, I'm going to take the actor-ness of it all to the side and talk about it from a human perspective. So deaf gain is the advantages that deaf people have that people who do hear or are hearing don't see. So if my husband and I are in bed and he's snoring, oh well. Deaf gain, I have a great night's sleep anyways. I don't have a problem with that. And there are other moments like that. But as a deaf actor, you know what's interesting actually is, so this is a great example. So I was just shooting a movie over this past summer. And it's very rare for a deaf actor like me to play a role that is just in sign language. So the deaf gain for that aspect is I see hearing actors who have to play a character that requires them to learn sign language, which is more than their natural demands on their job. But for me, I get to be deaf and it feels natural to sign. So like in a restaurant scene, if people are eating, they can't deliver their lines, but it doesn't bother me. I can still deliver my lines. And so they're just these little things and I like to get away with it. Or sometimes, I really hate to use this example, but sometimes, have you heard of the phrase deaf card?
No, I don't think so.
So deaf card is like when I use something as like an excuse, so to say. So if I'm showing up to an event that I'm late, I'll be like, oh, I didn't hear the announcement, which is true, but I'm leveraging it. And my husband says, look, John, you only get to play the deaf card once a year. You can't play it every day and be like, oh, excuse me.
Amazing. Okay, going back a little to talk about Our Town and working with Kenny Leon again, being able to do that production and having it be your third Broadway show, was that kind of like a full circle moment for you working with Kenny again?
Yes. Yes, for sure. So I will tell you that people might not know about the audition process for Our Town. I almost said no. I was going to make the decision almost to not audition for it because the original idea of the character in the show is that they wanted that character to speak the whole time. And I said, not me, no. And I said to Kenny, can I go into the audition and just be me? Can we remove the idea of speech? Because that was from Children of a Lesser God, and Our Town is a different production. And Kenny said, go for it. So I came into the audition room, and I showed a variety of capabilities to communicate that didn't rely on speech. So what you saw in Our Town was from many different approaches, and I was glad to finally have sign language be involved and have that representation of how deaf and hard of hearing people communicate in this landscape. It's not just limited to speech, it's not just limited to sign, but we are a spectrum when it comes to communication, and I'm so thankful to Kenny to have the opportunity to present that in a different light. And again, Our Town was big. Remind me, how many cast members were we? 28? Mm-hmm. And you know how rare it is for 28 people to have that special type of bond like we did? That's rare. And still to this day, we're all still in touch with each other. It's amazing.
Yeah. And even going back and thinking about the rehearsal room for Our Town and seeing how you and Kenny crafted how each moment was going to be. Maybe you're speaking this word, maybe you're signing this part. And seeing the whole company really take part in that was so much fun to see, especially for my first Broadway show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell me, how did you get involved in Our Town?
You know, so it was very quick. I was doing an internship in Union, New Jersey at Premier Stages, and I got an email from someone from Camera, I think, who was like, I need more people on the stage management team. And I had met Camera the summer before for the Cody Renard Richard Scholarship Program. And I was like, here's my resume. And I didn't think anything was going to happen. I was doing this little internship in my head. And then a week went by, I didn't hear anything. And then 2 weeks later, they were like, hey, you've got it. Kevin from RCI called me and was like, yeah, so you're going to start. We're going to put you on a bus. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Let's go. And then 2 days later, I was on the bus and we were going up to New Hampshire.
And were you in Pennsylvania at that time?
I was in New Jersey.
Oh my God. How long was that commute?
Commuting to Midtown every day took me like 2 to 3 hours. And then, because sometimes I would come from South Jersey, but nothing's worse than that bus we were on when we went up to New Hampshire. Like, it was fun once we were there, but that bus ride was one of the worst experiences of my life.
You know, I actually didn't join the bus.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm sorry, good luck to all of you.
You made a good decision. All right. Going to the 3 shows again that you've been in, what were some differences you saw from show to show, whether they were changes you noticed in yourself and your craft or ways the industry as a whole shifted?
With Children of a Lesser God, that was the first Broadway appearance, and that was a huge deal. It felt like something I can't really explain. It just felt like a lot of gratitude. And again, because it was a deaf character, there were a lot of challenges involved in it for me as an actor, which meant I got to grow so much as far as trying to find a way to be comfortable in my own skin, really. So that was one thing that I took out from that. And then doing King Lear, that was my second production. Now, I've never done Shakespeare before, and I thought, oh my gosh, doing King Lear is like a 4-hour-long show. But in that production, I took the back seat. I was more in the ensemble, and I learned more actually by watching. I mean, being able to see Glenda Jason, Ruth Wilson, Pedro Pascal, I mean, all of these huge names, and watching them act, I was like, oh my goodness. So I used that opportunity to develop my craft by listening to other people who were on stage. And then I brought that and more to our town. And in our town, I focused on just looking at the character and to respond without thinking, which is so simple, right? Like whatever is happening in the moment is what's happening in the moment. And so I'm grateful for these 3 productions. And now with the culture being where it is and representation, I'm seeing a shift. But I also see that we have a long way to go. We do. But it is shifting a little bit.
Yeah. All right. So going from the ensemble of King Lear to ending up playing Hamlet in Hamlet, which I saw somewhere that was one of your dream roles. My question is, what aspects of the character of Hamlet did you find yourself connecting to once you were playing him?
The loneliness. Because Hamlet, I feel like, is one of the most misunderstood characters of all. Hamlet sees things that he really believes in himself that they all don't believe of him. And that's what I felt connected to, because I feel like I'm living the truth in my life that people around me don't really understand, and they don't really understand who I am, and that's what I connected to Hamlet about. And he's trying to break this disillusion of what is reality and what is not reality. And also, Hamlet has so many different layers that haven't really been touched upon with previous productions, and so I'm hoping that one day I can really get there. But I also feel like I'm a little too old for that now. The gray hairs are starting to come out, and I can't hide them.
Never say never. There's hair dye.
Amen.
What would you say your dream role is now, and do you think that maybe it's a role that's yet to be written?
I'm actually going to go further back. So my dream role is something that hasn't been written, yes. And I think that right now it's time for new stories to be told. We need to see more new, fresh eyes, fresh takes, and something that really pushes boundaries, that experiments with narrative, as opposed to just bringing something that's already done, that's an original. We've seen that. So we also need more deaf writers to do that. And we need more deaf people on the creative side, directors, backstage. We are screaming for that, and that's what we need to see more of now.
Yeah, and that goes into the whole conversation of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. So from your perspective, what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about EDIA right now?
Well, I think we both have a knowing look at each other, so we get it. But I think this is important for me to say now. I do feel that people who are not invested in EDIA think that accessibility is an afterthought, which is not the case. And I will tell you, as a deaf actor, that has been one of the most painful points during the negotiation process for any job, is the constant fight for my access. Even for basic needs, actually. Yeah. And I just hope that one day, especially for the younger generations, that they don't have to do that pushback, that arm twisting, that negotiation around what needs they can have met and what they have to give up, and just have all of their needs met and given. And I do hope that one day that this can be part of the standard practice for contracts, on Broadway, off Broadway, whatever, you name it, but that there are non-negotiables around EDIA. Like if a person wants to get an interpreter, absolutely, we have that budget ready. If somebody needs captions, absolutely, we have that budget ready. So it doesn't have to be a discussion, it doesn't have to be a negotiation.
Yeah. All right. And you touched on this a little already, but as the industry evolves, what do you hope the next generation of theater makers bring to their storytelling process?
I hope what they bring is their story and share those stories. And I hope that people who are investing in theater take risks, be open-minded. I mean, look at Hadestown. Look at A Strange Loop. They won Tonys. So the audience is there. And so why not let the younger generation have the chance to do these original stories too? They will be the voices of tomorrow. But it also takes people who invest to take more risks. And I'm not seeing that happen. I feel like a lot of people are taking the safe route, which means revivals, visiting jukeboxes. But that's not what we need. Now is the time to shift things up because we have stories to tell.
I 100% agree. Okay. For my last question, what's one piece of advice you wish someone had given you when you were starting to pursue acting and before you entered the commercial space?
Make mistakes. When you fall, pick it up and keep going. And it's okay to ask for help as well. And I mean, life is too short. It's just too short. And I think it's really important for you to be present and to enjoy life. And if you are in the room, you are meant to be. And so enjoy that moment.
Beautifully said. All right. That's all I've got. Thank you so much for being here today, John.
Thank you for having me here.
Of course. John McGinty, everyone. Woohoo!